Good morning. Thank you for joining us for this week's Grow, where we gather to recharge, organize, and work here as members of MWIG. We are so glad that you're joining us today for our Media Literacy Grow. This is part of a series that we've done. So if you're interested in looking at some past media literacy grows after this, you can go to our YouTube page and find those. Today, Meredith Gardner, our Director of Media Literacy, is going to be talking to us about setting boundaries around news consumption. And so I'm going to go ahead and turn the time over to Meredith.
Thanks, Rachel. Hey, everybody. I'm so glad to be talking to you all today. As we conclude a crazy election season, I thought it would be good for us to take a little bit of time to talk about setting boundaries around news consumption. And we're going to talk about a few things today. Rachel, if you want to go ahead and go to the next slide. We're going to talk about MWIG's news consumption philosophy. And a lot of this information is from things that we've already shared, but I've updated to kind of fit the moment. I know a lot of people are feeling really tired from the election, and now we're getting into like a presidential transition. We just feel like news is coming at us right and left, and it can be really overwhelming, and I feel that too. So if you're feeling that way, it's not alone. So we'll talk about MWIG's philosophy on this and ways to prevent burnout, and then also some different things you can do to set boundaries with technology. And then at the end, we're going to talk a little bit about how to talk to relatives about politics or current events, because I know the holidays are coming up and people are feeling nervous about that, myself included. So that's what you can expect today. And then I have this cute little New Yorker cartoon that says, "My desire to be well informed is currently at odds with my desire to remain sane." And I feel that deeply right now. So I thought I would share that with you. Go ahead and go to the next slide, Rachel. Okay, MWIG has a philosophy on news consumption, and it comes from our principles of ethical government. Number 3A says all individuals have a duty to educate themselves about the actions of government officials and current events in the world, taking care to ascertain facts from reliable sources of information. Okay, so our goal at MWIG is to be a peacemaker and to advocate for ethical government in a courageous way. But to do that, we have to be informed about what is happening in government on a local and a national level. And we can't be peacemakers if we're not centered on a foundation of truth. Sometimes to me that feels overwhelming. And at MWIG, we also care about women as individuals, and we care about their well-being. And so that's why we want to talk about what this looks like at a time when there's a lot of news and a lot of things that are quickly moving. And we want to be informed, but we also want to remain effective advocates. And so there has to be a balance there between taking care of ourselves and remaining informed so we can be peacemakers. Go ahead and move to the next slide, Rachel. Thanks. Okay, so earlier this week, if you want to go back, Rachel. Thank you. Earlier this week, we had our Media Literacy Monday post, and I specifically picked this because I felt like it was pertinent. 6 strategies to prevent news burnout. And so if you missed it, we're just going to go through, and I'm going to talk about each point a little more in depth than what we showed in the social media post. So go ahead, Rachel. The first tip is to name and sit with your emotions. So if you are feeling upset about what's happening in the news right now, I want you to take the time to not push that down, and I want you to just be willing to be aware of that. If you're feeling joyful and you're feeling happy, then that's good too. Take time to think about that as well. But if you're needing to grieve or needing to feel sad or upset about something, just allow yourself to do that. That's healthy. Go ahead to the next slide. Watch your words. Oh, I will add a caveat. Some of this might sound a little bit like therapy speak. I am not a therapist. I did work for several years as a crisis counselor though, and so I know that these tips are really helpful. So I do have a little bit of background in like helping people when they're in crisis, and I think right now there are a lot of people who are feeling like they're in a crisis. And so I'll just add that caveat. The second point is to watch your words. So honor your feelings, but also notice when you're using words that are overly extreme, especially on social media. I was just listening to the book, our book club pick, called Bowling Alone. And in the book, he talks about how the advent of the internet really changed our communication because we don't have all of the face-to-face interaction that we do on the internet, and the way we communicate ends up being different and a little bit more dehumanized. And so we want to be sure that when we're talking on social media, we're being careful not to dehumanize other people. We're not calling people names, but that also we're not using all or nothing thinking, that nothing will get better, because that's not true. And that's something that we tried to focus on in MWEG during the last several months with our Summer Hope experiment and with our Hope Votes campaign, is that we want to make sure that we're making choices that orient us towards hope, even when it's difficult, and that hope is an action. And one way we can exercise hope is to be careful about what we say. Go ahead to the next slide, Rachel. Get involved. So like I said, hope is an action. So if you are feeling upset about the election, get involved. If you're feeling happy about the election, get involved. We can make such a huge impact in our local communities, so much more so than on the federal scale. And it's our local communities that have an impact on our lives more directly. So if you are feeling upset or in despair, think about what causes matter to you and get engaged with those. That might mean becoming a bigger part of a school PTA or booster club. It might be volunteering with a local nonprofit or MWIG. We're happy to have you. It might mean you don't have the time, perhaps, to volunteer, but you can donate. And doing those positive actions will help combat despair. And so I would just highly encourage you to take action and to get involved when you get to that point and you feel ready. Go ahead, Rachel, to the next. Practice joy. This is something I'm working on. Find hobbies that bring you happiness and build times into your day when you can find moments of peace. It's so important that you think about that we don't get so caught up in all of the bad things that are happening in the world, all of the wars and the contentions and the division, that we set aside time to purposely do things that we enjoy. And that's not opting out of the bad things, and it's not abdicating of ourselves of responsibility. It's a way of helping ourselves continue to move forward and to not get burned out. Go ahead, Rachel. Take a break. This is huge. We'll talk more about this later too. But if you're feeling overwhelmed by the news, you have my full permission to take a break. Turn off the notifications on your phone. If you have news apps, turn them off. Set screen time limits for yourself on things like social media, on Instagram, or Twitter, or whatever your platform of choice is. Turn on Do Not Disturb on your phone for several hours. I actually did this yesterday. I was feeling a little bit overwhelmed in the afternoon, but I was trying to focus on like making dinner and spending time with my kids, but my phone kept pinging. And so I went ahead and I turned on Do Not Disturb and was able to just kind of purposely say, I'm not going to look at my phone. Everything will be okay while I just worry about dinner and my kids for a while. So it's okay to disengage yourself for a period of time while you take care of yourself, and the news will still be there when you're ready to re-engage. I promise. Go ahead, Rachel. And then finally, ask for help. If you are feeling really overwhelmed and in a lot of despair, I know that this is common right now. There's a lot of people who are feeling this way. Make sure that you connect with somebody who you trust, who cares about you. And then if you need to, there's lots of hotlines available if you feel like you're needing to talk to a professional, or you could also connect with someone like a therapist. But if you are feeling overwhelmed and it's inhibiting your daily functioning, especially after a period of a couple weeks, make sure you do reach out for help. And I know that gets exacerbated, especially during the holidays. Okay, go ahead, Rachel. Okay, so that was our series for this week. And those are just 6 quick tips. And if you want to refer back to those, you can go on our Instagram page at Mormon Weg, or our public facing Facebook page, or I posted it in MWEG Central. You can find all those tips on there. And I would love to hear if you have any of your own to add. So please go check that out if you need to refer back. I want to talk a little bit more about this idea of making your technology work for you. Um, like I said at the beginning, at MWIG, we feel like it's super important for people to be engaged with the news and to have that shared foundation of truth so that we can build appropriate policy on that. But um, there's a balance there. And you need to make sure that whatever technology you're using to find the news, you're making it work for you and that it's not bogging you down. I have done my own little technology audit in the last couple of weeks, and I've made a lot of adjustments on my phone, especially for how I engage with the news. My first tip for you is to consider using newsletters and aggregators. So, newsletters are things that a lot of newspapers put them out. There's also organizations like Tangle is a really popular newsletter that aggregates news from other sources. They don't produce their own news, and they offer kind of like news from the left and the right, and in one place. So there's a lot of different newsletters and aggregators you can turn to so you don't feel like you're constantly having to look around at all these different sources. And that can be helpful in reducing the time that you spend finding news and getting caught up in maybe clickbait or sensational articles. So Tangle is one that I use often and would recommend. There's several out there that people like. I know there's one that's Utah politics specific that's excellent. If you live in Utah, there's often newsletters that are local to your state that you can use. And I highly recommend, if you're feeling overwhelmed by national news, focusing on local news, because that, like I said earlier, that's going to have a greater impact on your life and your own well-being. I would also highly encourage you to set a specific time of day to consume news and then try to stay within that boundary. So, for example, back in the day when I was a kid, we didn't have people didn't get their news on the internet, right? And I remember my parents would sit down in the evening with the newspaper and they would read the newspaper, and then we would watch the national news around dinner time, and that was it. That was it for the day. They were informed, and they didn't constantly have a phone that they were getting news alerts on. And so if you're feeling overwhelmed by the level of news that you're receiving, I just would highly encourage you to try to set a specific time of day to consume it and then avoid it at the other times if you're able to. Turn off your notifications as needed. I mentioned that earlier. I have a lot of news apps on my phone, and like being in touch with the news is part of my job, but all of my news notification are off on my phone right now. Because there's a lot happening, and if I leave them on, I'll be getting alerts all the time, um, and that's not always a good thing. Create periods of time when you are off social media. A lot of people have social media as their primary news source now. And if you get news off of social media, that's not necessarily a bad thing. There's a lot of really reputable outlets on social media that provide great news content. But I would just really encourage you to think about how to place boundaries around that, because you can't control as well what shows up in your feed when you're on social media. So, maybe there's specific times of day, like I mentioned, trying to make dinner and like spending time with my kids, where you just decide that you're not going to go on it. And that can give you that mental break and help you make time to tune into those things that bring you joy and enjoyment in your life. Okay, go ahead, Rachel, to the next slide. Thank you. Peacemaking while discussing current events. Okay, so some more philosophical things from Emwig. So we believe that peacemaking demands great tolerance for people and none for injustice, right? And so that what that means is, and this can be hard, especially when there's so much polarization right now and so many differing views, that it's important for us to remember that people are not our enemies, and that it's what we're working against is injustice, and that we have to love our neighbor even if we don't agree with them. And so I'm going to say something that might be a little bit controversial, and that is that peacemaking requires that we stay in community with those with whom we disagree. And sorry, my husband's being really loud in the background, so I'm texting him to shut the door. Okay. Peacemaking requires that we stay in community with those with whom we disagree. And that means that if we don't agree with how somebody voted or how a group of people voted, we should avoid shutting them out completely. And I've seen a lot of people say like they're disengaging with people who voted for X, Y, and Z. And it's super tempting because we may struggle to feel like that person shares the same values that we do. And but we need to stay engaged with them because we can't build bridges with people we aren't in relationship with. And so I would just highly, highly encourage you to think about that. I know there's a lot of people who are hurting right now, who are struggling to maintain contact within different communities because they feel hurt or betrayed by people they disagree with. But I would just encourage you to try to get to a place where you can stay in community with those people. Peacemaking cannot be accomplished without relationships of trust and respect. And we're going to talk about this a little bit more too. Relationships are super important to peacemaking. And if we can't change people's minds, if you're on social media and you get into an argument with someone you don't know, on a social media post, it's probably not going anywhere, right? But if I have a disagreement with one of my siblings about a current event, I might be able to persuade them because we're in a relationship of trust and respect, and vice versa. They might be able to persuade me, but we can't accomplish peace unless we know we have each other's backs and we have each other's well-being in mind. So those are a few philosophical points that I would encourage you to think about. Go ahead, Rachel, to the next slide. And I have some practical tips for you for engaging on current events topics, or if you feel like somebody is kind of sucked into a conspiracy theory. This happens on all sides of the political spectrum. People get kind of attached to conspiracy theories, or if they just believe in a point that's not true, it's false information. Some rules of engagement for you are to start from a place of curiosity. So that can be really hard. Like if you know somebody's saying something that's been completely debunked as not true, it's really hard to not just like throw up your hands and roll your eyes and say, come on, like you should know better than that. Instead, start from a place of curiosity and respect. And remember that anybody can, for various reasons, we all get attracted to beliefs that aren't true. So just keep that in mind. If the conversation gets heated and you start trying to talk to this person and you say, please explain more about why you think that, what about this topic is so important to you? How did you come to this conclusion? If things start getting really heated, take a break. When emotions are high, you're not going to make progress. Move the conversation to a better time and place if necessary. So if your aunt is a flat earther, perhaps the Thanksgiving table is not the best place to talk about that. You might decide to do that at lunch another day or after dessert. But just keep in mind that the setting is important for those kinds of conversations. It's also important to remember you might never change their mind. And if you're familiar with the documentary we showed, the basement talks, where women from opposing views went into conversation with one another and they became friends, but they never changed each other's mind. And so just know that you might never change their mind, and make your goal maintaining and improving the relationship and learning to understand the other person. And that's what's going to be most helpful to you at the end of the day. Go ahead, Rachel, to the next slide. These are some conversation helpers that can get you started. I can see that this topic is important to you. How did you come to care about this issue? How has your perspective on this issue changed over time? If you could talk to an expert on this issue, what would you ask them? I was worried about this too. Here's what helped me. Try to find points of overlap and shared values. And that can be a really great way to hold a peaceful conversation with someone you don't agree with or someone who you feel is maybe misinformed. Go ahead, Rachel, to the next slide. Okay, and those are all my primary tips for you guys today. I just want you to know that you are not alone if you're feeling overwhelmed by the current news cycle and feeling overwhelmed at the thought of being engaged with people with whom you don't agree on issues around current events. You're not alone in that. And if you're feeling overwhelmed, you need to give yourself permission to take a break and to take care of yourself and to set clear boundaries for how you're going to consume news and information. Because the news cycles over the next few months and the next several years, it's going to be intense. There's going to be a lot, and you have to make sure that you are ready, and that you have set the boundaries you need to get through this time. It's like, I think of it as training for like an endurance race, right? And if you've been with MWIG for any period of time and have engaged with our media literacy materials, we've been training for this. And we are ready for what's ahead as long as we continue to set boundaries and stay engaged and take care of ourselves. And I love this verse from Mosiah: see that all things are done in wisdom and order, for it is not requisite that a man should run faster than he has strength. So make sure what you can do is going to be different than what your friend can do or fellow MWIG member can do. So really prayerfully and thoughtfully consider what you need to do to set good boundaries in your life around your news consumption and around your relationships in talking about the news. And I know it's going to help you out so much. And if you have any questions, I'm here, and join us on MWIG Central, and we can talk about different tips for boundaries together. That's what I got for you today. Thank you.
Thank you, Meredith, so much for sharing with us. And it's always a good reminder to be smart consumers of the media that we are taking in. Like I said at the beginning of the Grow, that if you are interested in some other media literacy tips, you can go to MWAG's YouTube page. You can just search up Mormon Women for Ethical Government, and you'll get recordings of past grows. But specifically, there is a playlist for the media literacy grows that you can go through and get some other really great tips that Meredith has shared with us over the past years of being good consumers of media. We will be back next week to talk about some areas of advocacy that MWAG is in, and with Andy Waddups. So if you will join us next week, we'll be here. Thank you to everybody that's been here. If you have any questions, feel free to pop up. You can unmute yourself. We'd be happy to answer questions. If there's no questions, we'll see you guys next week.